In this video with the AnKing, I'm going to explain how I got a 260 plus on step 1. And bear with me, this is going to be a really long video, but I want to go into all the details. So I'm going to put time codes in the description for all of this, but I'll start with my background, and then I'll talk about my general study plan, which includes all of this stuff, all sorts of stuff. Like I said, if you want to skip ahead, you can check the description of this video. I'll talk about the actual test day and the day before, what I did, advice I received versus what I did, some myths that I think are out there, and then I'll end with a little bit on how I never did more than 600 reviews a day. Now I know there's going to be a lot of questions from this. I usually get like 30-40 emails a day, and there's no way for me to answer all of those, so we set up a Patreon here to answer your questions if you're interested in that. Here's the link. Now why am I sharing what my score is? I really fought this and ultimately decided it was the same reason I came up with this hilariously funny Comic Sans logo in the library a year and a half ago, and eventually ended up continuing the project, which meant I had to get rid of that terrible Comic Sans. But this whole project has been about helping you guys, and there were a lot of people that reached out to me and said that it would be helpful for me to share my score. And I also felt like, well, when I was in my first Why Use Anki for Step 1 lecture, I went up afterwards and asked them what their score was because I wanted some validation as well. So that is why I'm sharing. But importantly, I want to give you some of my background because I think this is important to understand kind of why I got this score and how I did that. I had a really high MCAT and college GPA. I'm typically a good test taker. I always have been. So take that into consideration. I knew really early, like from day one, that I was interested in competitive specialties. I'm currently thinking about dermatology. So I was willing to put in the work, and I did. I worked really hard over the last 2 years to get here, and it's going to require a lot of work if you want to do the same thing. We had a 2-year preclinical curriculum, so I was not taking this after clinicals, and I had 2 years to study and prepare for it. So just keep that in mind. I rarely get test anxiety that affects my performance. If anything, it actually improves my performance, and I know this is different for other people, so I wanted to point that out. I also had a study plan with Anki at the center. Obviously, I built a whole YouTube channel around it. But if you are not studying with Anki at the center of your study plan, then you're going to need to adjust things from what I'm doing and how much of the question banks I did and stuff like that. I wanted you guys to understand kind of what my curriculum was like, just so that you can try and make this fit to what you're doing. This is our foundations of medicine. We start out with, this is where we do anatomy, histology, whatever. A lot of it is not very board relevant for about 6 months. And then after Christmas break, we start into the pathology and stuff. So this is about the time when I started watching Pathoma and Boards and Beyond and all of that. But during this time, I was still able to do 2,000 or 3,000 Zonky cards. So you can still pull a lot of things here. After that, I suspended all of my anatomy histology cards and only did the Zonky deck moving forward. And just for fun, this is where I started the YouTube channel. And about here is where I started the AnKing deck project. So it's been kind of a fun couple years here with you guys. Now I want to explain how I used Anki, and for that I'm going to go into Anki and show you a couple things with this being the center of my study plan. Okay, obviously Anki was at the center of all of my studies, and one thing I want to point out real quick, if I go here on the heat map, that was day 1, and I didn't miss any days, and I think that's important. There really are ways to miss days and be okay, but the point is that you're being really consistent and you're not being back and forth about it. The other thing for step 1 is I felt these USMLE lab values were good. I didn't do all of them. If I go over here to our website, just under here on other useful med decks, I linked that. This is also the 100 Concepts Anatomy deck. A lot of people, I didn't actually end up using it. I felt like the deck was good enough. Now I'm going to hit, this is really, really important. We've got this video on the Anki algorithm and this other video on recommended settings. These are super crucial to understand, like really, really important. And then all of these are linked in the description of this video for you guys. But I've got this post here that I made a while back that talks about my settings versus this other popular video on YouTube. If you want to go read up on that. And if you're brand new, I would just recommend this whole playlist, this whole highest yield videos playlist is everything that I think is really important. And the reason for that is you're going to spend a ridiculous amount of time using Anki. In fact, I've got my statistics pulled up here. If I scroll down, you'll see in deck life in the last 2 years. I've spent over 600 hours just reviewing flashcards. That doesn't include all of the time that I was in the browser reading cards or searching cards, reviewing things. Like, so it's a ridiculous amount of time. And you're also going to dedicate your life to this. It is worth understanding how it works so that you can make it work for you. Your stats are not going to look like mine. But one thing I do want to show you, here's my review count. And this is our foundations. You can see there was less. And then this is when we started into the pathology stuff. That's my summer. And then that's my first block and second block of second year. So you can see there are significantly more cards when you get to the second year. You get closer to step one. And there's little peaks in the middle of each of my units as well. And you can see, like I said, there's a ton of time. If I scroll down here, these are my mature and learning card percents, and take this with a grain of salt because I experimented a lot with the rememorize add-on, which doesn't affect the correct. So even if I got it wrong and I used rememorize or whatever, so it doesn't count it. So this is probably closer to 90% on both of these, but you'll notice that my hard and easy buttons are not incredibly used. I used the good button more than anything. And that's really important to understand. If I could go back, I wish I actually did it a little bit higher on both, but they should match each other theoretically so that your ease isn't decreasing a ton. When I see this bar way up here, then I know something's wrong and you're really in trouble. You'll see that my average ease is a 246%, but also notice my lowest ease is at 150. I was not scared to hit again. Don't be that scared of ease hell, but if you get something wrong, get it wrong. The other thing I wanted to point out is the most important thing you can do to decrease your card load is to understand these cards well the first time you do it. Remember, Anki is a tool for remembering, not for learning. That's really, really important to understand. But for example, in the extra section, it's differentiating this and this. It's really important that you understand that. That's what the practice questions are going to come from, is that type of stuff. So understand that stuff the first time you do it, and then when you go through the reviews, it's basically just to bring it back in your memory real quick. So just focus on those key points and you should be good to go. And another common question that we get a lot is how do you decide how many cards to do a day? It varied. And so just as an example here, I went into the browser, I counted how many cardiology cards there are. There's 24,062 if you count the pharm, the physiology, and the pathology. At our school, we had 4 weeks of cardio, so I wanted to be finished with that by the end of that block. So I just did the math real quick, and that's how many cards per week I needed to add. And I'm going to kind of discuss how I added cards a little bit later, but that's just the general idea of how I decided how many cards I needed to do per week, and sometimes we're busier than others. All right, what resources did I use? This is a really common one. Keep in mind there's a lot of really great resources out there. You don't need to use the same ones as I did to be successful. For anatomy, our cadaver lab was awesome. We have one of the most amazing anatomy teachers at our school. If any of you have seen the Noted Anatomist YouTube channel, he's the guy. And he helped us a lot making our YouTube channel in the beginning. I just made image occlusion of cards for most of that. I did it myself. I didn't use any special deck, but there is a step one clinical one that we have listed on our website if you are interested. For histology, I used this Histo app, which was also provided by our school at the time. I made Anki cards on that. And again, I suspended the anatomy and histology cards after our foundations thing. I did not keep them going into step one. During our foundations unit, half the cards I used were Zonky cards and half of them were my self-made cards. My point in sharing this is that you should start pulling those cards as early as you possibly can. You're definitely going to be learning things from day one that are in Zonky, but you probably will have a lot of stuff that is in-house, lecture specific that will not be boards relevant, and you still need to study that, but try and get as many of those board relevant cards as early as possible. It will help decrease your load later on. For physiology, I used Boards and Beyond. I used Physio for biochem, and they're awesome. I know a lot of people also like Pixorize. I really like Physio. I think they're the up-and-coming physiology specialists. I think you'll see a lot more of them. And then also sometimes those flashcards were built off of the Costanzo textbooks, and I didn't particularly love the Costanzo textbooks. I know a lot of people do, but the flashcards kind of read like a textbook because of how they were made. So sometimes I would just read through the physiology flashcards, and that was good enough for me if I had a good background in it. For pathology, Pathoma definitely was my go-to. He helps you understand the why really well, and it is, like everybody knows, it's very high yield. I also use Boards and Beyond to fill in the spots where Pathoma didn't cover. For micro, I use Sketchy Micro, and for farm, I use Sketchy Farm, and sometimes there are just flashcards on farm stuff that Sketchy doesn't cover. I don't particularly love Sketchy as a company. I don't think they're really looking out for students' best interests. They keep increasing their prices and stuff, and they're not updating their videos to stay on top of Step 1 stuff. I think that Physio is probably going to be better moving forward, along with, I think, Pixarize has started getting in there. So I know they kind of have the market right now, but in the future I would look towards other things. I don't think they're going to be the only ones or the best ones in particular. In the AnKing overhaul deck, which includes Anki and LOL Not a Cop, I finished 27,266 cards. I didn't do all of them. I think if I went back, I probably would have suspended even more, especially for those of you that are moving forward to the pass-fail stuff. You're going to need even less cards to be fine on that. For the question banks, this is a question I get a lot. I did USMLE RX. I finished 100% of it, and I got 84% correct. I usually started around 70% whenever I started a new organ system. I did this one by organ systems and not random. And I'll explain in just a second how I did this. The Amboss one, I did 80% completed, and I got 81% correct. This, again, I started probably like 70% when I started and slowly moved this average up over time. The 97th is what percentile Amboss said I was in at the end. And I want to go in real quick. I'm going to show you why I think Amboss is such a powerful question bank. And I think it was really what helped me get there. Real quick before I go and actually show you that, UWorld, I finished 60%. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Because of coronavirus, I was aiming to finish 80%. And I got 88% correct on that one. I actually started around 90% correct and moved down slowly, which was kind of worrisome, but it is what it is. I started pretty high, and I credit that to having done Amboss. And I'm going to go show you right now why I did Amboss and why I think it's the best. Okay, I've got Amboss pulled up here, and I'm going to show you why I like them so much. Firstly, we've got this video here. If you want to watch that, it goes a lot more in depth than I'm about to go, but I'm going to pull up this real quick, just a Qbanks session. And this is why I like them, and no other question bank has this. So as you're reading this question, if I decide I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read this, and I'm highlighting the important things, of course, you want to read this sentence first, and then I highlight things. Amboss will let you test yourself. Did I highlight the right things or not? Okay, well, I should have highlighted that, but I got these two correct. And I think testing yourself like that, trying to learn whether or not you're highlighting the right things is really important. That teaches you how to approach this test, and that's really, really powerful tool of Amboss that I think is kind of underrated. Also, this attending tip is really nice. If you just cannot figure out what it is, you can click that attending tip to give you a tip, and then you can still try and answer the question. That's two really powerful things. The other thing I really like about Amboss, firstly, this ethics thing is amazing. I wish I'd discovered this years and years ago. Let's close this for a bit. They have all of these learning cards like this, and you can turn on the high yield, which will show all of this stuff is highlighted here. This learning radar is really cool because as you're reading through these learning cards, if I scroll down a bit, you'll see that it's underlined in red. And that means that there we go. It means I previously missed questions on this. And so I think that's really powerful as you're reading through these things. And Amboss is a really good review right before you take step one because of these learning cards. It also in the main page tells you which learning cards to do. But I think it's cool because it highlights what stuff you've missed before. And they also teach you how to do these questions. And then lastly, just a perk, this Amboss add-on that they have where you highlight over words and it explains it more really helps keep the big picture for me. I loved that. And so just a couple things I think that Amboss has that other question banks don't have. Okay, and then lastly, before I leave this slide here, if I could go back, I would do this opposite. I would do 100% completed of UWorld, 80% completed of Amboss, and 60% completed of RX, but that's just the way it happened, and this is why. This is how I set it up. So with the RX question bank, here's a little star just to show you where I'm taking step one, remind you. I did those RX questions at the end of every unit. So at the end of this unit here, like I said, our foundations was nothing. So the first time I did it was at the end of this molecule, cells, and cancer block. The second time I did it was end of host and defense. So for example, the host and defense, we covered immunology, microbiology. So I did all of the RX questions on immunology and microbiology that last week of the block to prepare for our in-house final. And then I did the same thing for every block, basically right up to the end. And that's why I finished 100% of that one. I started Amboss at the beginning of second year, and I did about 20 to 30 questions a day, and that was really difficult. I did it almost every single day, and it was really hard, in particular because I was doing it at like 3 or 4 in the afternoon. You're tired, you've already been studying all day. that is, I think, what made everything easier when I got to dedicated. I think is what really helped prepare me, helped me do well in-house exams, and like I showed you just barely, Amboss really teaches you how to take a question, so by the time you get to UWorld, you're not trying to figure out how to take a test. And then I started UWorld right here. And that was the beginning of my well, about 4 weeks before the beginning of my dedicated, and then I did that. All right, practice test. Everybody is asking about this, and I really debated on whether or not I wanted to share it, but everybody really wanted to, and so I really hope this is helpful, and I've tried to add extra details to make this a little more helpful than the typical stuff you see on Reddit. So January 25th, I took the actual test on May 1st. Keep that in mind. So this is 14 weeks ahead. I took NBME 23 and scored a 246. I would strongly recommend taking 23 first if you're doing all the new ones because it's particularly hard. I think the curve is really harsh. And I put the asterisk here because I looked things up. I hadn't even finished neuro or any MSK derm stuff at this point. And so if it was an MSK question or a neuro question, I knew I didn't know it, I would search it in Anki. And if it was there, then I would use that. But I didn't Google anything. I just assumed that if there was a flashcard on it, I would know the flashcard. So I also took an early baseline. I don't think it's necessarily necessary for you to take it quite this early. The reason I did is because I wanted to go on vacation, and so I needed to know whether or not I could buy flights. And unfortunately, coronavirus ruined my trip to Europe. But that's why I took it early. So I don't think you necessarily need to do that. Okay, about 3 weeks later, I took NBME 20. Again, I would also recommend taking 20 early. It's a harsher curve, but I ended up getting a better score on it. And I still to this day can't figure out quite why I got such a good jump, but I did look stuff up, and there was also a lot more derm stuff on that test, and that's my field of interest. So I think that's why I did better on that one and had quite a bit jump, but I think that it's actually an overestimation from where I was at that point. A couple weeks later, I did the Amboss test. I felt like this was a super good test. It was very similar to what the actual exam was. I would definitely recommend doing it every year if you get the option. I took a block final here, so I took a little bit of a break here because I was in school and needed to study for that. So 3 weeks later, I took NBME 18, and this is probably the closest of the NBMEs to the actual exam. I feel like a lot of the NBMEs have these super random questions that are out of the blue, and the actual exam didn't have quite that bad of out of the blue stuff. Started UWorld a couple days after taking that, and then a couple weeks after that, I took UWorld 1 and scored a 269. UWorld 1 is quite a bit easier than the actual exam, so take this with a grain of salt. I know people say it overestimates. It does. I know some people beat it, but our academic office is really good. They've got all this down to algorithms and stuff, and they recommend you take UWorld 1 about 4 weeks before the actual exam because then it overpredicts to predict what you would get in 4 weeks. So that's what I would recommend. Started dedicated on this day after we finished our last block final, and I took NBME 21. I would take 18 and 21, about that middle ground. Like I said, take 23 and 21st, throw 18 and 21 in the middle there. And then my exam got canceled on April 27th, which was a huge bummer. Quite the emotional roller coaster with coronavirus. I was originally scheduled to take it on May 9th. Now, on that evening, about 7 o'clock, there was a spot that opened up on May 1st, which was just a couple of days later, and I decided to take it, which was nuts. But had I not taken it, this is what I would have done. I would have taken NBME 22 and then 24. Those are supposedly the most predictive NBMEs, and so I would recommend doing that, but I can't comment on that because I didn't actually do it. So 3 days before the actual exam, now that I found out that I'm doing this, I took UWorld 2 and scored a 266. UWorld 2 felt the closest to the actual exam, and it's a reasonably predictive exam too. So I felt like NBME 18 and UWorld 2 were pretty similar to the actual thing, and I would definitely recommend reviewing those really well and save UWorld 2 for the end. And then 2 days before I did the free 120 and got 92%. I don't know that their score on that really matters all that much, but our academic office told me that there have been rumors that some questions on actual exams have been word for word or at least similar to the free 120. So I definitely recommend doing that and do it close to your actual exam so that you'll have that in your short-term memory. And then I took my actual exam May 1st and scored a 260 plus. So that is kind of the gist and the breakdown for what I did here. Now, I want to point out a really important thing, when I took that NVMe 23 early and 20, at that point I had almost finished 2 Qbanks already. And so my baselines were higher. And I think that that's important. Like I said, start your Qbanks early, do them every day consistently. It's going to be way, way, way better for you than trying to do a ton. And by that time, I already knew how to take the test, how to approach the questions. It was just more of a content thing. So some test taking tips. Some of these are obvious, but I'm just going to reiterate the ones that I felt like were the most important. Read the question first. This is super, super important. Then you know what you're looking for in the question. You're not wasting time. So read the question, like the last sentence where it's actually asking you. Maybe read through the answer choices as well, so you know kind of what to look for. Highlighting. I feel like, and this is the doctrine according to the AnKing, I feel like if you can highlight the right things, you will get the question right. That is the real key. It's whether or not you can highlight the right things in the question. Especially if there is in that, when you do the first step, you read the question first. If the question says increase or decrease or whatever, something like that word, you're going to want to highlight increase, because sometimes you'll do the whole question and then you'll click the answer where it decreases just because you forgot by that point. So highlight those kinds of things, and then highlight the 3 or 4 most important facts. And like I talked about earlier, Amboss is really good for teaching you how to do this. And then there's the Golian saying where he says they are telling you the answer. That I felt like helped me a ton. When you approach a question, you have no idea what you're looking for. Mark it, come back to it. And when you get there, just remember, they are telling you what the answer is. Like right in the question. There are sentences that are telling you to rule something out or whatever. And for me, for whatever reason, approaching a question like, okay, where's the answer? They're telling it to me. Where is it? Rather than trying to think through a clinical scenario like a physician or something. Just approach it like a question at that point when you're starting to get frustrated and look for the answer. All right, so what did I do in dedicated? I was originally supposed to have 3 weeks. Now remember, I started early because I wanted to go on vacation. You could take a longer dedicated. I started while I was in my last block, just because I could, because we was pass fail and I didn't have to worry about it that much. But pre-dedicated, I was doing 4 blocks plus the class material, and that was a lot. I was starting to get burnt out, and that was the only way I was going to finish 100% of UWorld. So then I consulted with our academic office at my school, and they said switch to 3 blocks. And so anyway, that's what I did. Avoid the burnout. And then I also made a missed questions filtered deck. And this was really key because I was focusing on the flashcards with things that I had missed. I was either making questions or I was tagging cards that I already had. Sorry, making cards or tagging cards I already had and putting them in a filtered deck so I could specifically focus on those. I'm going to show you that in a second. I also used this exam notifier add-on. When we went to Germany, I met Glutamate, and I had this great idea for an add-on, and he's been working on it, and I've been testing it, and it was awesome. I'm going to give you a little sneak peek here. We don't have a timeline on release or anything yet, but it was really helpful. And so I'm going to show you how I used that, and hopefully in the future you guys will all be able to use that. And I also suspended about half my deck. Because I wanted to limit the amount of cards I was doing and focus more on questions. Remember, I only finished 60% of UWorld because I had to take it early and everything. So I was really trying to blast through UWorld because I was only going to finish 80% of it with the plan I had by my original date. So I'm going to go show you really quick how I did all of this. But first, I'm going to show you just what my list was. This is all the things that I was going to keep, and then I suspended everything else. So you can use this list to kind of help you, or make your own list. But I'm gonna go into Anki now and show you how I did all that. Okay, I'm gonna show you the last few things that we talked about. The first was the missed questions filtered deck. If I go into my browser here, you can see that I have a missed questions tag. I added that to all my cards based off of when I missed them on and whatever. You don't really have to do that. You just need to add some sort of tag so that you can isolate all of them. And then it puts it up here, and if you have this add-on, you can go edit, create filtered deck based on this search. It pulls everything up. You can change all the settings to whatever you want. If you're confused at this point, I have an entire video on this just for you. So I'll link that in the description. But you build this, and it'll pull a filtered deck, and it will pull out all cards. So you can pull, see this was 23, it's now 22. It'll pull out all cards there that are missed questions. Now, the advantage to this is that you can really focus on all of these cards every day, go slower, and then go faster on these ones. And I felt like that was really, really helpful, and just really helped quiz myself. Now, the other thing is this exam notifier add-on that Glutamate has been helping me with. And basically, there's a way to put in the date of your test. And when we go in here, you'll see it pops up with this little thing here that says if you answer this, it will schedule past your due date. I'm going to go back again so I'll let you see that one more time. Go back in here, and so every card, it'll pop up there. See, this says it'll show up 11 days after your step 1 exam for what we have scheduled. And I also put code on my card here that tells me when my step 1 exam is, so I can see, oh, this is scheduled into 2.5 months, and my step 1 exam is in 2 months, so I know this is the last time I'm going to see this card. That was just really helpful. Like I said, we don't have a specific timeline on that yet, but I am going to make a video on it, and it's going to be awesome. And then last but not least, if we go back into the browser, is how I decided what to keep. And I showed you the list of things, but you can see I have this to keep tag that I added. And the way to do that basically is just decide what you want to keep. So I knew I wanted to keep the entire biochemistry deck, all of the bugs and drugs. So basically you just click that, like there's the bugs and drugs, and I'm going to select all of these cards with Command or Control A and then add tags. This is the fastbar add-on up on the top, but all of those are up in these menus too if you need to. And then I added that to keep tag. Now the other thing I did though was I selectively isolated things. Like I went into step 1, pathoma, and we all hate these nephrotic nephritic syndromes, right? So I clicked that and I added tags to all of those, and then I clicked that and I added tags to all of those. So I had everything I wanted under this to keep tag, right? So if I close this, then the trick here is you click on your deck with all of your cards in it, and then down here you Command or Control Alt click the tag that you have, and that adds a little minus sign in front of it like that. And so this is all the cards in that deck that do not have that tag, and so then I suspended all of those, and that's kind of the quick trick there for that. Okay, and then lastly, everyone always asks my schedule. I didn't really have like a schedule. It was just I needed to finish 4 blocks and then review those 4 blocks every day. I usually study about 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. There was nothing real special about it. And then, of course, I was taking full-length exams every now and then, too. And then when I took the UWorld 2, I wanted to get used to a real exam length. And so I took a block of UWorld and then did the UWorld 2 exam. And then theoretically, you could do another one after, but I didn't because I was tired. And then regular exercise. This is super, super important. It'll help you sleep better. It'll keep your anxiety down. I strongly recommend doing that. I loved just getting on the treadmill and running every morning. It was really important to me, and I felt like that helped me do better. Okay, many of you are obviously going to be asking, what about these pass-fail changes? What would you do differently and stuff like that? Because you don't need a 260 on step 1 anymore. So what would I have done differently? I would have suspended a lot more cards after each block. Only keep the things that are like sheer memorization. Then you just need to keep them in your memory long term, and everything else, whatever. But also cards like hemoglobin is made of heme and globin, which is awesome. It's a great card to do at first because it simplifies things, and Pathoma is great at teaching things like that. But after you've done that card for like 2 or 3 weeks, suspend it. I wish I'd done that a lot more often. You probably only need 1 to 2 question banks. And like I talked about, Amboss is really good at teaching you how to take a thing. And then UWorld is a lot more like the actual exam format. So I would probably recommend doing Amboss first and then UWorld. But those would be the 2 that I would definitely pick. I didn't do Kaplan, but I know that they're good. But that's probably what I'd change there. And then I also would download the Step 2 deck from day 1 because Step 2 is going to be way more important now that Step 1 is pass-fail. So I would, if your in-house lectures are talking about stuff like that, or you feel like there's a card you kind of understand based off what you're already learning, you could pull those step 2 cards early and minimize the amount of time you're having to spend on that during clinicals, and then you could spend more time doing questions and stuff during the clinicals. All right, the day before the test day. This is really important. I exercised. I definitely pray, meditate, relax, everything you can do to bring your anxiety down. I would not spend a lot of time studying, if any, on the day before the exam. And like I said, I got moved up a week. I lost a whole week of studying. I still took the day off. I don't regret it. I did about 1 hour of last-minute review topics, which I'll show you in just a second. And that's all I did. And I would recommend doing that, and that's it. And I also made an equation sheet just because it's like something that I could write down in the test really quick. You can't actually write it down at the beginning of the test, but I used the break between block 1 and block 2 to write down those equations, and I felt like that was helpful. And then lastly, the Amboss Ethics learning card is amazing. I wish I'd found this out months ago, and I only found it out the day before the test. So you should definitely check it out earlier, but also probably read it before the day before the test. There's going to be a lot more ethics questions coming up in the future, and this card was awesome. It went through all of that. Okay, so the last minute review topics that I did, here's a list of them. This is the first half, and I'll show you the second half in a second. You can pause the screen if you want to, but there's really nothing special about this. I recommend you make your own. Don't copy mine. But for example, I had noticed that I was missing a lot of questions on this stuff and this stuff. And I also noticed the type 1 through 4 hyperlipidemias were in pretty much every practice test. So I felt like that was fairly high yield. I also felt like this was showing up a lot. So just things like that, or like words where you're getting confused. As you're going through like a month or so before the exam, write these things down. Like I took on UWorld 2, I think it was, there was a college and synthesis question. I was like, wow, this is way harder than it should be for me. So I wrote that down. Just write things down as you're going through the last month or two, what you feel like you need to review last minute, just to remember those kinds of things. Like I said, don't copy this list. Okay, the day of the test. These are also really important things. I ate a really high fat protein breakfast. I went to McDonald's, got myself a McGriddle. It doesn't have to be McDonald's, but eat something high fat protein that's going to hold you over and not give you a sugar crash. For lunch, same thing, high protein lunch, maybe some caffeine if you're starting to feel a little tired. If the official drink of all physicians, Dr. Pepper. So what I had, I only drank about half. You don't want to make it so that you have to go to the bathroom too much. But I ate a protein bar and some trail mix, and I think like half a PB&J for lunch. Plan your breaks out. This is also really important to know what you're doing before you get in there. Here's what I did. I did about 5 minutes between the first couple blocks, and then after the block 4, I took a 35-minute lunch. And then between block 5 and 6, I took 10 minutes. The reason for this is block 6 is the one where you're going to feel the most tired. But I only took 2 minutes between block 6 and 7 because you are ready to go at that point. You're ready to get out of there. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. So that's just kind of what I did. Plan yours. And then breathe. This is really important. You got to calm yourself down, focus. You definitely know how to do this well. And just control that anxiety and channel it into doing well on the test. All right, moving on to this next part here. Advice that I received versus what I actually did. And a lot of this advice and stuff has changed over the last 2 years since I started. The whole Anki community has dramatically changed in this time as well. But here's those things. So the first one, everybody said read first aid cover to cover. First aid is the Bible of medical school, blah, blah, blah. I almost never opened it. I feel like if you're doing the Anki deck, that you won't really need this. Maybe use it to fact check, or if you need to get the big picture on something, but for the most part, this isn't really necessary. I still recommend buying it so that you're using the Anki deck legally, but yeah, you don't actually need to open it. Okay, second one. Everybody kind of says ignore lecture, focus on step 1. Well, I really wanted to do well on step 1 because I knew I wanted to get into competitive specialty. I also watched almost every lecture. And looking back, I feel like this helped me a lot. I did it at the end of the week. I did Pathoma, Boards and Beyond, whatever, at the beginning of the week and added all my flashcards. And then Thursday, Friday, I watched most of my lectures at 2 times speed or as fast as I could. But I felt like that really helped me solidify things and get the why parts of those flashcards that I maybe hadn't gotten during the first time. And I can also say I know for sure that I got at least 2 questions right on step 1 on questions that were not in the Anki deck, but I did learn them somewhere during our lectures. So just take that with a grain of salt. All right, third one here. Go slow enough on your cards to really think about it, really understand the why. Some people say read the extra section every time you go through the cards. I started around 7 cards a minute, sometimes a little slower than that, and eventually got above 10 towards the end. I don't know that I would actually recommend this to everybody. This was kind of my own personal test, but I was trying to essentially go faster so that I could spend more time doing practice questions every single day. Like I said, I was doing AMBOSS questions every day. And then essentially that whatever fell through the cracks, I would catch with the practice questions. And I felt like this worked pretty well for me, but I don't know if that would work well for everybody. Regardless, I'm going to go into Anki now and show you a couple things I did that I felt like helped me go faster. Okay, a few tips to go faster as you're doing these cards, and ignore my speed here. I've only done 9 cards today. I'm usually not that fast. So firstly, get a controller. It helps. It's more comfortable. I think it helps you go faster. I just would recommend it. This video shows you how to set that up, and we've got a link in the description of this video as well for good controllers that work for that. The other thing is, when you get to the cards that you're learning, here's a great example with primary hyperparathyroidism and all of this. And you can see that Anki formatted things really well. So this is bolded, and then you've got this underline. And the way you should do this, I mean, the first time you learn this, obviously you should be focusing on stones, bones, groans, and psychiatric overtones. Really understand that, learn it. But when this card's been out 3 or 4 months, you honestly should just be reading primary hyperparathyroidism, CNS, and immediately your brain should jump to depression. There's a lot of things on this step 1 exam that are just like gut feelings because you've done these flashcards so many times. But especially on those mature cards, you should be able to go faster. And I think that's why my speed picked up over time as well too, is because I have more mature cards. But really, if you really focus on understanding this stuff the first few times you go through it, like the first 2 weeks, that's crucial. Yeah, you go slower on those learning cards, and those mature cards will pick up eventually. The last thing I did to really help me go fast, and honestly, this is probably the biggest trick, is the Pomodoro timer. And I recently made this add-on. It's currently shared as a beta on Patreon. If you want to test it out, once it's finished with that, I will share it publicly. But I'm not the best coder, so got to work out some bugs. But you do a 25-minute timer, you focus, no emails, no phone, nothing. Silence everything and just do flashcards for 25 minutes straight. And then you do a 5-minute timer, and that's your break time to do whatever you want. And if you do that, I promise you'll get through your cards way faster earlier in the day. You'll feel like you have more free time. They don't drag out all throughout the day. It really was a very helpful strategy for helping me go faster. Okay, moving on to the next one. A lot of people said add the same number of cards per day, use the load balancer add-on, that kind of stuff. Load balancer is just garbage for medical school. You don't want to do that. You want to do it yourself. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, don't use the load balancer. And control, you don't necessarily want to add the same number of cards per day. Here's what I did. I added 250 cards per day on Monday. And I did that early because when you have your settings set to berry related reviews, you're still going to get some of those 200 or 250 cards throughout these days. You may only end up adding like 190 or 180 on Monday. Now those cards, if you have the settings the same as mine, you'll see them the next day and then in 3 days. So on Tuesday and Friday. Same thing with 200, and I'm going to go talk a little more detail about this at the end when I talk about how I never went over 600 reviews in a day. But same thing, this is going to add those cards here and then send to Saturday and so on. But I front-loaded 200 to 250 here, around 200 here, and then Thursday I was adding 50 to 100 because I was in class all day Wednesday. Your schedule may be different than mine, but this is why I did that. And like I said, I'm going to go a little more into detail on that in a second. Okay, number 5. Everybody said mix up your subdecks with the Hoochie add-ons or with the V2 scheduler because step 1, everything is mixed up. I didn't love that idea at first, and I kind of liked seeing it, organ system by organ system. However, the V2 scheduler is amazing, and I would strongly, strongly recommend everybody switch to it. And I've got this video on it that tells you all about why, and this one here that shows how you can use custom filtered decks, which is why you need the V2 scheduler. And I feel like the filtered decks are really powerful, and I only started using them the last couple months. I wish I'd had them from day one, so strongly recommend that to everybody. All right, this one here, set a max interval so that you don't forget things. There's a lot of debate on this, whether you should set a max interval. What should the max interval be? Blah, blah, blah. I would say actually set a max interval. I agree with that advice. With it going past fail, I had mine at 6 months. I may have bumped it up to 7 or 8 months. But I'm going to go into Anki now with the Anki simulator add-on and show you what happens when you set a max interval and why I think it's worth setting one. Okay, this is the Anki simulator add-on. I've got it all set up with my settings and how I had everything, and I'm going to show you a couple of simulations just to give you a feel for what happens. So I have my max interval set at 6 months, and I've simulated this to finish the deck in about a year and a half. So I'm going to simulate this just to give you a feel for what's going on. So you can see this puts you right around 600 to 700 cards a day towards the end, which is about where I was. I was usually close to 600, but I also did this over more than a year and a half. Now if I increase this max interval to 9999, and we do this again, unlimited, and simulate that, you'll notice that it doesn't change that much, to be honest. There you go, yeah, see, it doesn't really change that much. Maybe a little bit of a decrease here, but not a ton. And I think that's really important because it's when you're in your unit, you're reviewing things constantly. And then you get out of that unit and you've been theoretically spaced repetitioning it longer than you actually meant, or more than you actually meant to. And then you get out of that unit and you never talk about it again. So I think setting that max interval of 6 months or so is nice. If you set it to like 90, you'll notice there's a huge difference here. It does actually spike up. And so I would not recommend that. But I'm going to go back to my 180 settings. We'll clear that one. And notice what happens if I decrease my percent correct 5%. And like I said, I think this is the The biggest thing you can do to decrease your card count is to learn things well so that you're not forgetting them over time. See, now we're up to about 1,000 reviews a day instead of 600. So that makes a dramatic difference, whereas the max interval doesn't make that big of a difference. And so I think it's actually wise to set it at least 6, 7, 8 months so that things could pop up again before your test. Okay, last one of these. One advice that people say or they talk about all the time is you should suspend all of the Blue Galaxy cards or the UWorld cards that Blue Galaxy made off of UWorld questions. That's stupid. It's just dumb. Like, just yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like, there's cards on pelvic fractures causing urethral injuries. You're not going to know the answer to those questions unless you've done flashcards or studied it before. Just do the flashcards. All right, lastly, this is going to be kind of a shortened version. If there's enough interest, then I could consider making an entire video on this, on how I never did more than 600 reviews in a day. One disclaimer, I have a really good memory. My retention rates might be a little higher than yours, just FYI. But my point is to help you understand that if you understand Anki, you can minimize how many you're doing every day. Another disclaimer here is that we had a 2-year curriculum. If you have a shorter curriculum, then you're going to be doing more reviews per day. Don't use that number as a baseline. I just want you to get the idea, the principle behind this here. So like I said, here's back to this thing that we were looking at before. On Monday, when I added those 200 to 250 cards and I front loaded, I set my easy button to 3 days. That means if I felt something was reasonably easy, I could remember it in 3 days, then it would send it to Thursday. And the reason for that is because on Wednesday, I was not adding any cards. So they would go on Thursday when I was going to be doing less cards regardless. On Tuesday, I set it to 2 days because then I could send it to Thursday, same thing. And then on Wednesday, I set it to 5 days because it would send it to Monday. I wasn't adding any new cards on Saturday or Sunday, and so my Mondays were usually my lowest card load, but I had the most free time because I was front loading the week and I did all of my lecture watching for my in-house stuff on Thursdays and Fridays, so Mondays were less busy. So I sent them there. Same thing with Thursday. I set the easy button to 4 days so that they would go to Monday as well, and I kind of balanced it that way. The other thing I did is if you understand the rememorize add-on, you can move mature cards around days to make things less. And so I did that. And I also intentionally did it so that my Monday through Friday and my work week was busier. I had a higher card load. And then on Saturday and Sunday, I would drop, and have maybe 50 or 100 less reviews, which made the weekends a little bit more relaxed. So I'm going to go show you that right now and how I used the rememorize add-on to balance things around. Okay, this is probably one of the highest yield tricks. All right, it's not actually that high yield, but it's awesome. And I detail it out in this video here on how to miss a day. This video goes way more into detail. I would strongly recommend learning all of these methods, but I'll show you just a quick one here. So if I go into my stats page of the entire collection, you'll notice that tomorrow is looking pretty bad, right? I got a ton of cards. I'm almost to 600. Let's say I wanted to add a ton of cards today because I have a ton of free time. But tomorrow I don't have that much free time, and I don't want to add another 200 cards onto that. What I can do, let's say I have free time this day too, I could either move these cards to today, or I could move them to the next day, or I could actually spread it over both, and I'll show you how we do that. So if I go into the browser, I'm going to do is due, and this is all the cards that are due today, right? But if I do prop due equals 1, that's all the cards due tomorrow. You can see there's a lot more. Now I want to selectively find the ones that are older. So I'm going to do prop interval greater than 21 means it's mature. So there's 167 cards. So I'm going to select all of those and I'm going to reposition. Oh, first I actually need to go back and make this is a really important part. If I go into the add-on thing here, under the rememorize add-on, you have to have, under the config, you have to have these set to true in order for this to work, and then restart. So anyway, back to the browser. So I've selected all these mature cards. I'm going to reposition them. And like I said, that video will talk a lot more about this. I'm just showing you real quickly, but I'm going to set it to 2 because today is 0, tomorrow is 1, due equals 1 here. We're going to send them to the next day. So boom, they're gone. And if we go back to the stats page here, I'll show you what exactly we just did. There you go. You can see tomorrow now looks good. So now I can add 200 cards and still not go over 600 and say tomorrow I'm not adding any cards, but I just moved those, just the mature cards, over to the following day. Now let's try something else. Let's say you just want to do a significantly less amount, but you're not adding any stuff down the road a little bit, for example, in dedicated and stuff. If you need to catch up on a lot of stuff and then send them out over the future, there's another trick you can do here. So let's go prop due equals 2 because that's where we sent them all. And now we need to find all of the ones that are mature. So here's my 167 cards again. I'm going to select all of those and reposition them. This time I want to, so we've got it on 2, we want it to start at 2, but we want it to go over the next week or so. So starting at 2 and then 6 days following that, and we're going to randomize it. Now if I click OK, and we'll go back out here to the stats page so you can see what happens. And there you go. You can see it just randomly spread all of those cards along the next week. So that's just a really cool trick that I used occasionally to make it so that I could focus on mature cards later when I had free time and focus on the learning cards, because it is, if I haven't seen a card for 30 days, it doesn't matter if I see it in 30 or 31 days. But if I have a card that I just learned and I need to see it in 1 or 2 days, then it's more crucial to see it on the schedule. So just a fun trick. Okay, and lastly, really important for only having to do my 600 cards a day, I started on day 1 and I understood the Anki algorithm. I read the manual and I did it from there. And I think that's really important. If you take the time to learn how to use Anki, you're going to dedicate your life to this for the next 2 years, or maybe even more. You got to start day 1 and you got to understand what you're doing. My last thoughts here is that you guys can do it. I'm a medical student just like you. I was worried. I was anxious about this test. I've been stressed. You can ask my wife. There's been days where I just was ready to break down. But you can do it. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm here to help you, and there's a lot of other people here to help you. So keep that in mind. You can do it, and trust in yourself. And I know that you're all going to be incredible doctors, and it is an honor to be a medical student with you training in today's world. Thanks for learning with the AnKing. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel here, as well as follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Patreon. That is at AnKingMed. Also, feel free to reach out via email or check out our website, ankingmed.com, for more tips and tricks.